Welcome back to the deep dive. We are tearing into another stack of sources today, and let me tell you, this one is it's a real heavyweight.
It certainly is.
We're taking a deep dive into Elias Canetti's monumental work, Crowds and Power. Now, if you haven't encountered this book before, just be warned, it is definitely not light reading.
No, not at all. Canetti wrestled with these ideas for decades, really, after witnessing some truly terrifying mass movements in the 20th century.
Right, and what came out of that is this profound, sometimes frankly unsettling, but utterly compelling exploration of fundamental human phenomena.
Exactly. It's about that strange alchemy, when individuals seem to just merge into a mass.
And the primal roots of dominance, where does that come from? And these peculiar ways humans relate to survival and transformation, it's vast.
It really is. And the source material you shared, it gives us a really valuable window into some of Canetti's core concepts from this, sprawling book.
Yeah, he doesn't just stay in one lane, does he? He's pulling from history, anthropology, psychology, myth, looking for patterns everywhere.
Across cultures, across time. He covers everything from ancient rituals and, tribal behaviors right up to the psychology of rulers and even, fascinatingly, the nature of mental illness.
So our mission, as always in these deep dives, is to unpack the key ideas presented in these specific excerpts we have. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of insight.
It really try to get a handle on Canetti's unique perspective on these big themes. Crowds, packs, survival, power, transformation.
Think of this as getting a guided tour through the complex mind of a Nobel laureate, but filtered specifically for you based on what's in front of us.
And it's absolutely crucial to emphasize as we navigate this, often challenging terrain, that we are strictly sticking to the content provided in these excerpts.
Right. No outside interpretation, no taking sides.
Exactly. Canetti's work is deeply provocative. It really demands careful consideration. Our role here is simply to guide you through his arguments and observations.
Presenting them exactly as they appear in the source material. We're not endorsing them, we're not refuting them.
We're here to illuminate his dense but often startling insights, showing you how he draws these connections across such vast distances in time and culture.
That's what's so striking, isn't it? His ability to spot these recurring patterns.
Whether he's looking at an ancient Egyptian battle or a religious festival or, the dynamics inside a theater, he sees connections.
And get ready for some ideas that might genuinely surprise you, maybe even make you pause a bit.
Oh, definitely.
We're going to explore why, in Canetti's view, a quiet, seated theater audience is actually a stagnant crowd. How he sees war as fundamentally driven by the aim of creating a heap of the dead.
Stark phrasing, but that's his argument.
And even the psychological links he draws between something as basic as, digestion and the exercise of power. It goes deep.
It really does. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin with a mind like Canetti's?
Well, we have to start where Canetti does in the sources, right? With the fundamental concept of the crowd itself.
Exactly. For him, it's so much more than just a collection of people standing together. It's a distinct entity, almost like a force of nature.
With its own peculiar attributes, yeah. Things that make it totally different from the individuals who happen to be in it at that moment.
Right. And right at the heart of it, according to the source, is this incredible, almost unbearable tension.
He describes the crowd as having a sudden origin, and it just erupts, forms rapidly.
But immediately, the moment it forms, it's plagued by this deep-seated, constant fear of disintegration.
Like a living organism that knows it's inherently unstable. It's fascinating.
He says it must grow rapidly, absorb everyone it encounters, because this rapid increase is its primary way of trying to stave off that terrifying moment when it just falls apart.
But the deep paradox he identifies is that this very openness, this desperate need to absorb everyone, the good, the bad, the indifferent, that also means it inherently carries the seeds of its own dissolution. He puts it quite starkly, doesn't he?
He does. It must take everyone in. But precisely because it does, it must eventually fragment and disperse. That fear and the counter-urge to grow seem absolutely foundational.
Absolutely. That underlying tension, the sudden birth, and the constant threat of death by fragmentation, that seems to drive many of the crowd's core attributes.
Which are laid out explicitly in the source material. You touched on the first one. It always wants to grow.
Yeah, it's not just a characteristic. He treats it like a fundamental drive, almost biological or psychological.
And he gives examples of how historical institutions, particularly religious ones, have kind of struggled against this innate urge of the crowd to expand boundlessly.
Right, like religious ceremonies stuck inside temples couldn't hold the growing numbers or the spreading message forever.
Exactly. leading to significant movements bursting out into the open or seeking universal reach. He points to the Sermon on the Mount being delivered outdoors, the Pauline drive to make Christianity universal, breaking tribal or ethnic boundaries, Buddhism's explicit rejection of the caste system to embrace everyone.
He sees all these through that lens as the crowd's instinct to escape confinement and absorb more and more people, overcoming any artificial barriers.
Precisely. And what's remarkable, almost counterintuitive, is what happens within that growing, dense mass.
Right. Canetti argues that for the moment the crowd exists, a profound equality prevails.
All those individual differences, status, social standing, wealth, even the different jobs people normally do, they just dissolve. Temporarily, at least.
The source gives that simple but powerful example, dancers all stamping the ground together.
Yeah. In that intense moment of collective action, which he sometimes calls discharge, the feeling of physical density being packed together.
And the feeling of absolute equality become fused. Everyone is doing the exact same thing, exact same way, with the same shared intensity. It's a powerful leveling force.
And you can't really have that sense of equality without the physical reality of density. The crowd, he says, loves density. It can never feel too dense.
Nothing must come between its parts. Everyone within it should just be the crowd itself, unified, compressed.
And this feeling of physical compression, being packed tightly with others sharing the same impulse, it's felt as strength. And it's strongest during that moment of collective action or discharge.
So you have this mass that forms suddenly, is terrified of falling apart, wants desperately to grow, finds equality in dense, shared action. But what's missing?
Purpose. It needs purpose.
Okay.
And Canetti says the crowd absolutely needs a direction.
It's always in movement or wanting to be, moving towards a goal outside of any single individual within it.
And this shared goal is absolutely critical. It's what suppresses all those countless private, different goals that would otherwise immediately splinter the crowd.
He makes a crucial point, too. A goal that hasn't been fully achieved yet is essential for the crowd's continued existence.
Right. It'll latch onto almost any goal, almost desperately, just to avoid falling apart. Without a shared direction, it ceases to be a crowd and reverts to just a fearful collection of individuals.
Okay, so based on these core attributes, Canetti then identifies several distinct types of crowds, right? Each showing these principles in different ways.
Exactly. The source material details quite a few, starting with some of the more, primal forms.
Like the baiting crowd. This type, he says, grows incredibly rapidly, largely because there's virtually no risk involved for the participants. They have overwhelming superiority over their victim, who is typically bound, trapped, or fleeing, completely defenseless.
The victim is already marked for destruction, basically, so there's no fear of retaliation or legal consequences for the crowd's actions.
And Canetti describes permitted murder, when shared among many, as something irresistible to the great majority of men. It's a harsh observation.
He links this impulse to a deep psychological need to deflect the ever-present threat of death away from oneself and onto others.
The source mentions the gruesome detail of displaying the victim's head after the act. This display, he says, leads to a kind of collective discharge, a release of tension.
But it also carries the risk of disintegration for the crowd itself, doesn't it? Yes, because in seeing the victim reduced to nothing, the crowd members can suddenly recognize themselves in that victim, triggering fear and potentially causing them to disperse, a kind of terrified flight from the dead figure who now embodies their own mortality.
Which contrasts then with the fleet crowd. Canetti makes a distinction here from just pure panic.
Right. Panic, he says, happens when a crowd's movement is repeatedly blocked. That blockage makes it lose coherence, and each person becomes an enemy of the next, seeking only their own safety.
But mass flight is different. It draws energy from its coherence.
He describes it as a powerful, undivided river of people all moving together. The shared fear remains bearable precisely because everyone is in it together, moving with a singular purpose, even if it's just escape.
There's even an exaltation of common movement, he calls it. A strange kind of power in that shared surge away from danger.
Then you have prohibition crowds. These are interesting because the equality here isn't based on doing the same thing together, but on a common refusal.
A strike is the prime modern example he uses. Workers, normally unequal in tasks and wages, become powerfully equalized by their shared refusal to work, a negative unity.
Exactly, forged in defiance. And the reversal crowd is particularly fascinating, pointing to these psychological forces.
Canetti sees these as crowds formed by the collective discharge of accumulated stings of command, something we'll need to unpack more later.
He gives that striking, almost bizarre example from the source about the French Revolution.
Yeah, suggesting it didn't truly begin with the Bastille, but earlier with young people gathering to massacre hares.
It sounds strange, but he interprets it as turning against the lowliest available quarry as a preliminary step before daring to attack superiors.
Like discharging built-up pressure onto a safer surrogate target first, turning the hierarchy upside down, even if just against animals initially.
It's about that symbolic act of rebellion, that initial discharge. The source also mentions other types like feast crowds and double crowds, hinting at the breadth of context Canetti considers social, religious, even existential dimensions.
And significantly, double crowds in the context of war. Canetti's view here is incredibly stark.
Unwavering. War, at its core, is about killing. It's about the transformation of live adversaries into a heap of dead.
The explicit fundamental aim of warfare, he argues, is to cut down as many of the enemy as possible.
And the victor isn't necessarily the one who takes territory, but the one who creates the largest heap of dead on the enemy side.
He even posits that rivalry between growing crowds is a prime cause of wars, each side seeking to increase its own numbers of living fighters, while simultaneously increasing the number of dead on the opposing side.
And the source includes those gruesome historical examples from ancient Egypt under Merimta and Ramses III.
Right, where victories were formally proven by cutting off and counting severed private parts or hands from the defeated.
Measured and displayed back home as concrete, horrifying evidence of the heap of enemy dead. Tangible proof for the crowd that remained. It's chilling, quantifying victory by destruction.
He also delves into crowd symbols, exploring how elements like fire, the sea, rain, forests, corn, wind, sand, even the heap itself, serve as powerful representations of the crowd's nature.
Fire, in particular, he sees as a potent parallel. It spreads rapidly, it's contagious, insatiable, destructive, always seeking something to consume an enemy, and then dies away quickly once its fuel is gone.
All attributes he sees mirrored in the crowd's behavior, and he notes how fire physically attracts crowds, almost serving its own growth instinct.
Even abstract concepts like treasure are seen as crowd symbols, a heap of collected imperishable units that can drive intense lust, conflict, and even transform disciplined armies into mere treasure-seeking mobs. He cites Plutarch on that.
We should also mention two more specific types detailed in the source: the stagnant crowd and the slow crowd.
Right. The stagnant crowd is closely compressed, but it's waiting. Density is key, the pressure is felt as strength, but the energy isn't yet discharged.
There's an accumulation of desire for action, waiting for a spark. He uses theater audiences as an example.
Passive, fixed in seats, aware of their individual existence until the performance ends. It's only the applause, that sudden unified roar, that acts as the measure of how much a crowd is actually formed.
And finally, the slow crowd, defined by a remote, almost immovable goal and immense persistence over a long period.
The Exodus from Egypt is his classic example. It functions as a crowd for decades, as long as it collectively believes in the promised land, the distant goal.
Doubts arise with hardship, hunger, thirst, constantly threatening disintegration, requiring the leader, Moses, to constantly reestablish faith.
The physical individuals change entirely over 40 years, generations born and die. But the Exodus as a whole persists as a single, continuous, slow crowd because of that shared, persistent direction towards the unreached goal.
Okay, so we've covered the crowd's nature growth from fear, equality, density, direction, and the different forms it takes, from baiting crowds to theater audiences to war. But Canetti doesn't stop at large masses. He also looks at smaller groups he calls packs.
Right, the pack. It's a different kind of group formation, often more focused, maybe more primal, with a clearer internal structure or purpose compared to the more amorphous, unstable crowd.
And he looks at various types. There's the hunting pack, mentioned briefly, focused on a single prey animal.
But the war pack is distinct and significant because it's inherently half of a formation. It's pack against pack.
Canetti notes that in the original forms of warfare he examines, the enemies are often very similar. Human males, warriors, with reciprocal intentions.
The source mentions the Talipang example to illustrate the specific ritualized nature of these early war packs preparing for reciprocal conflict.
Yeah, the war chief calling men, rituals like fasting, taking women to set fires, painting bodies. It shows that structured, ritualized preparation to face their mirror image, the enemy pack.
Then there's the really fascinating increase pack. These packs are specifically aimed at increasing numbers, often linked deeply to totems or desired animals.
Canetti suggests this stems from a deep psychological drive in early humans. faced with overwhelming numbers of animals, to somehow be more, to participate in that abundance.
And he gives examples of totems that aren't necessarily useful animals like kangaroos or buffalo, but surprisingly, also insects we'd consider vermin, scorpions, lice, mosquitoes.
The idea wasn't immediate utility, but a desire to ensure their vast numbers for oneself, to become as numerous, as abundant as the totem creature itself, a primal urge for multiplication.
It's deeply connected to ritual. The Mandan buffalo dance described in the source is a powerful illustration.
Men wearing buffalo masks, dancing intensely to make the buffalo come, ensuring the herd's abundance, facing starvation if the ritual fails.
Canetti connects this to the common incorporation, right? Ritually eating an animal, but with honor, preserving its bones, believing the spirit will return and bring others.
Linking hunting to the increased pack through sacred eating and preservation. The underlying urge, he argues, is preserving the precious psychical substance of the pack by transforming it through ritual, ensuring growth by participating in the totem's abundance.
And we have the lamenting pack. This forms around the dying, specifically to express grief and respond to loss.
In archaic forms, like among Australian Aborigines, the lamenting pack actively tries to hold the dying back, covering them with bodies, forming a protective heap.
Only after certain death do they transition to pushing the deceased away toward the world of the dead. This pack often forms because the dead person is seen as having died for the sake of the people, a protector, a savior figure.
Canetti draws a direct line from this to historical religions of lament. He describes the Shiite Muharram festival as a profound example.
Processions, black flags, rhythmic self-beating, leaping, shouting Hassan, Hussein, the martyrs' names. It's a powerful physical manifestation of shared grief, solidarity, identity, forged through collective suffering.
Rooted in that ancient pack dynamic, he even touches on the Easter Holy Fire ceremony in Jerusalem.
Linking it loosely, though it's a feasted resurrection, to crowd and pack dynamics. Pilgrims packed densely, frenzy, the rush out with the fire, escaping smoke, rubbing faces against flames.
Canetti views it through the lens of crowd phenomena density, discharge, the rush, rapid subsidence of frenzy.
And he includes that tragic detail from the source of people suffocating, becoming a great heap of bodies, starkly echoing his earlier imagery of war and crowds culminating in death.
So packs, like crowds, have diverse purposes: hunting, fighting, seeking abundance, grieving, different ways groups cohere and act.
Which naturally leads Canetti to analyze individual power, especially the power held by rulers.
And the core, maybe his most impactful insight here, is his concept of the survivor.
It's a simple, brutal idea. For Canetti, the moment of survival is the moment of power.
He explains the psychology. It's a transformation of emotion, isn't it?
Yes. The initial horror at death turns into a profound satisfaction, almost elation, that someone else who is dead. The dead man lies prostrate, the survivor stands.
It's seen deep down as if a fight just occurred, and one has struck down the other.
In this moment, the survivor feels utterly unique, standing alone amidst fallen others, and exults in it. Canetti argues the immense power gained derives directly from this intense personal sense of uniqueness. I am here, you are not.
And he links this directly to a fundamental desire for immortality, not just existing forever abstractly, but the very concrete urge to exist when others are no longer there, to outlive everyone.
Seen through this lens, killing is described as the lowest form of survival.
The most direct, brutal act of striking down an enemy specifically so you can feel your own continued existence validated while they lie dead.
The dead body is indispensable for the survivor's triumph. You have absolute power over the corpse. It cannot retaliate. Trophies, weapons, body parts embody this strength gained directly from killing and surviving.
Canetti suggests this moment is so potent, so tied to the core urge to survive, it creates a profound desire for repetition, almost addictive.
So how does this very personal psychological concept relate to the power of earthly rulers?
Well, Canetti points out a fundamental difference between an earthly ruler and, say, God. Earthly rulers are mortal.
And their subjects know this. A ruler can command, but can never be absolutely certain of obedience if subjects can simply evade their sentences, if their power isn't absolute.
This deep-seated fear leads rulers, Canetti argues, to use executions to calm their anxieties, especially as their commands expand.
An execution in this framework becomes something done almost for the ruler's own psychological reassurance. The The victim's actual guilt becomes nearly irrelevant.
The victims don't even need to have actively challenged the ruler. The ruler's own fear transforms them into perceived enemies that must be eliminated.
The ruler gains the strength of survival from these executions, surviving the victim they condemned. The right to pronounce a death sentence is a terrifyingly potent weapon derived from this primal survivor dynamic.
The source gives some incredibly vivid, even horrifying examples. Emperor Domitian's macabre banquet.
Extraordinary. Inviting senators and knights to a dinner in a pitch-black room. Grave-shaped slabs with their names. Black food. Naked boys painted black like phantoms.
Domitian talking only of death and slaughter. Guests in terrified silence, expecting death, then sent home with unknown slaves, intensifying the fear.
It's a planned, theatrical, terrifying experience of orchestrated survival, designed to exert absolute psychological dominance, reminding them their lives depend entirely on his whim. He makes them experience impending death and survival.
The story of Josephus in the cave is different, maybe more calculating.
Surrounded by Romans after a defeat, his own people wanting suicide, he manipulates them with lots for mutual killing, ensuring he's among the last survivors.
Surviving the collective death of his own people. Canetti argues he then used the power gained from this by convincing Vespasian of a prophecy, transferring his survivor power to ensure his own continued survival under Roman rule. Survival by manipulation.
And the striking example of Sultan Muhammad Shah of Delhi. After ordering a massacre of his own people, the only survivor is brought before him.
Instead of sparing him, the Sultan immediately orders his execution, stating he couldn't bear a wretch who survived the slaughter of so many brave companions.
Brutally illustrating that survival isn't always celebrated by the ruler. Sometimes someone else surviving can be a perceived threat, and their fragile power is extinguished. The ruler must remain the ultimate survivor.
Canetti also explores power not just as seizing or killing, but as the crucial counteract of avoiding being seized yourself.
Right, the physical space, the distance around powerful people serves this fundamental purpose. Social life itself, with its hierarchies, establishes distances to allay this primal fear of being grabbed or overpowered.
He notes how ancient civilizations used symmetry and rigid structures to create uniform distances. Rulers consistently stand furthest apart, protected by layers, guards, rooms, walls.
Sometimes equating themselves with remote cosmic entities like the sky, as the Chinese emperor did. From this remote security, they can have anyone seized, but it's virtually impossible for anyone to seize them.
And this brings us to the physical manifestations of power. Canetti sees teeth as a striking natural instrument of power. Their order, hardness, visibility function in consuming.
And digestion, perhaps most profoundly, is described as a hidden, constant, fundamental process of power.
Seizing something alien food, cutting it up, breaking it down, incorporating it, annihilating its individuality.
He sees this biological process as the most basic underlying exercise of dominance and transformation constantly happening within us, often overlooked.
And that link between killing and acquiring strength is literal in some cultures he examines.
The Murjan belief in Australia. The slain man's spirit enters the slayer, giving double strength, making them larger, but only if killed at night. A physical, magical expression.
Or the Fiji Islanders naming heroes based on kills Koroi for 1, Kolivisa Wonka for 60, directly equating killing with strength, status, even physical substance.
The urge to survive, dominate, incorporate these threads, weave through his analysis, bringing us to another complex area: transformation.
Canetti explores transformation in various forms, seeing it as a fundamental human capacity or desire changing shape, mimicking others, causing others to change, and perception.
Simulation is one form deliberately remaining midway between imitation and transformation, often to conceal intent. Approaching someone as a friend with hostile intent, pretending to achieve a manipulative outcome.
The mask is particularly important, not a full transformation, but an external object felt as foreign.
The wearer is two things: himself and the mask figure. He controls both. But there's always a part that fears discovery, fears being unmasked.
The mask limits transformation because it can be torn away. It's more a weapon or tool to be manipulated.
He contrasts this with master transformers, like trickster figures in North American Indian myths, whose power lies in their limitless ability to assume countless shapes.
And then contrast them with early kings whose power, paradoxically, rested on a strict prohibition on their own transformation. Sacred rigidity reinforcing their unique, unchanging status.
Canetti also examines transformation in altered mental states, notably delirium tremens. He describes the hallucinations based on the sources.
Multiple, lively motion melting into each other, primarily visual and tactile, often thin forms, wires, threads, water sprays.
And crucially, often diminished in size, tiny mannequins. Zoo animals reduced to cat size. Everything multiplied and reduced, while the sufferer stays normal size.
He calls it a Lilliput effect, denser, populous, fluid world of tiny shifting entities, feeling like a giant attacked by masses.
He connects this to a mental urge for increased multiplication, the mind overwhelmed by perceived numbers and fluidity. He mentions a patient seeing workshops producing huge numbers, equating production with transformation.
It shows how the mind can become a theater for overwhelming, constant, often threatening perceptions of things multiplying and changing form. This leads us to paranoia,
Where Canetti sees a different kind of transformation, or perhaps the undoing of transformation.
The paranoiac, he argues, is driven by an intense mania for finding causal relations. Everything must have a reason. Nothing is chance.
The terrifying unknown world is relentlessly traced back to the known. Strange objects unmasked as familiar things. Every perceived mask hides something familiar, often hostile.
Finding these reasons, uncovering connections, becomes a consuming passion, seen as recompense for a perceived wrong. Unfinished sentences like why since, compel them deeper into their system.
He describes this unmasking process. The paranoiac starts as a spectator watching others seemingly transform, but eventually shouts, "Stop! Masks off!"
The players in their delusion must stand revealed as their real selves, fixed, never to change again in the paranoiac's mind.
The assumption is these masks and transformations were deliberate, hostile. Concealment was key to a conspiracy. This tearing down of masks is harsh, spiteful, born of the conviction of finding an enemy.
And this connects directly to the perception of hostile pacts in the delusion. Canetti uses Daniel Paul Schreber's memoirs extensively here.
Schreber's belief in souls partitioning into celestial pacts conspiring against him is, for Canetti, a clear expression of the importance of these hostile, organized entities in paranoia's structure.
The source details Schreber's elaborate delusions. Soul murder by his doctor, conspiracy with Gaudeamances, family rivalry as cosmic forces, nerve specialists' power, Catholic conspiracy, 240 Benedictine monks in my head, Jewish conspiracy.
It's a horrifying panorama showing how the paranoiac perceives the world filled with hostile, organized pacts, often transformed or masked, acting with malevolent purpose.
Schreber's fear of being transformed into a woman and sexually abused also highlights transformation as a central perceived threat.
His defense was preserving reason, memory clinging to names, facts guarding words. Do not forget that rays must speak. The universe full of words like vermin forming an order, a complete seizing of the world through words as though language were a fist.
The paranoiac struggle becomes a battle for semantic control against a world perceived as shifting and conspiring through hidden meanings.
So transformation, whether in ritual, art, or mental illness like delirium or paranoia, is a complex way humans relate. And paranoia offers a dark mirror, a mind imposing rigid order on a world seen as hostile, masked entities by violently unmasking them.
That brings us to the dynamics of command and rule, another absolutely central theme, traced back to a primal biological origin.
He calls it the flight command, enacted most starkly between predator and prey. A lion's roar sending victims scattering.
It's not a suggestion, it's an imperative, a death sentence compelling immediate flight.
Canetti posits the oldest command is a death sentence, older than man, and its harshness still glints beneath all human commands, however domesticated.
Human commands are domesticated, woven into social structures, master to slave, teacher to student, and intimate relationships, mother to child, fundamental to society.
But commands addressed to large numbers have a special character. They're intended to make people into a crowd.
And surprisingly, Canetti argues, when directed at a large number this way, it doesn't arouse fear in the same way an individual command might.
A demagogue's slogan, hammered home, is a powerful command to large numbers. Useful, indispensable for the crowd to form quickly and maintain itself.
He observes that once a speaker forms an audience into a crowd, the specific demands almost cease to matter. The crowd feels unified and loyal because he made them a crowd. The shared command keeps them together.
And command is obviously central in the military. A soldier's life built around expecting commands. He distinguishes open discipline, explicit commands, from secret discipline using stings of command.
Explain the sting again. It's crucial.
Every carried-out command, especially one against inclination, leaves an alien foreign body in the person who obeyed. It's not assimilated.
And crucially, Canetti argues, the sting is felt as the true culprit, not the person themselves.
The more foreign or repulsive the command, the less personal guilt felt, as blame is subconsciously attributed to the sting acting through them.
This helps explain how participants in horrific events can recall details but feel no guilt. They were victims of the sting, agents through which the command acted.
He then connects this dynamic to the power of the Mongols, linking command, the horse, and the arrow.
The horse, built for mass flight, its nature shaped by the flight command from predators.
When man domesticated the horse, he took over this primal command power. The rider gives the command to the horse, embodying the predator's power, directing its movement.
The arrow embodies the sudden, distant command flying straight, hitting the target lethally from afar, an inescapable imperative.
The Mongol army's effectiveness combined these: absolute human command, the horse's readiness for directed movement, and the arrow's lethal, distant delivery of the death sentence command.
Canetti provides extensive analysis of rulers and power by examining African kingships based on the source material. He notes an amazing similarity of structure and institutions,
Suggesting fundamental patterns, a key feature, the profound link between the king's physical constitution and the state's constitution. He embodies its welfare,
his personal strength and health are conditions for his rule and the state's prosperity.
leading to practices like fixed reigns and ritual killing. Some kings ruled for a set time, 7 years for Jukun, then ritually killed at a festival to renew vitality.
Or the Bambara king determining his reign length by pebbles grasped while being strangled, controlling his own death for the state.
And killing for weakness was common. A king showing signs of aging gray hair, bad eyesight, impotence was seen as a threat. Killed, often poisoned, strangled to avoid shedding blood, or forced suicide. State health tied to the king's vitality.
Another stark feature, interregnum lawlessness. Between kings, a period of permitted anarchy, violence, robbery.
Among Mosi, Ashanti, Uganda, the strong, royals, chiefs, preyed on the weak. Order embodied by the king, collapsing in his absence, restored with the new, capable king.
And the absolute power over life and death was tremendous. Terror was essential. The Agar investiture formula, you are now Ada, kill everyone who says he does not fear you.
His wish alone was reason for execution. The executioner, indispensable. Terror wasn't a byproduct, it was essential. Losing it led to contempt, then downfall.
He brings in Muhammad Tughlaq, the Sultan of Delhi, again. Ibn Battuta described him as fondest of making gifts and of shedding blood.
Canetti sees these as the two faces of absolute power. Extreme generosity and extreme murderousness, mounds of corpses were common.
Yet, paradoxically, Ibn Battuta also notes his piety, leading him to seek religious legitimacy from the caliph in Egypt, treating him like a pope.
Removing his own name from coinage, walking barefoot before the ambassador, shows even absolute rulers can need external validation, revealing complex layers of power beyond force.
Finally, Canetti briefly touches on postures as expressions of power. Simple things. Standing versus sitting, standing when others sit, getting up when someone enters, kneeling, not offering a seat.
He notes standing at English parties can signify freedom and equality. Lying down can signify weakness or closeness to death. Squatting, sitting on the ground can show acceptance, freedom from needs, contemplation.
He sees the conductor commanding the orchestra and the audience's immobility as another power dynamic. Applause as the ancient salute to the victor, acknowledging the conductor's control.
So from the primal flight command to ritual killing, the Mongol's arrow to the demagogue's slogan, Canetti offers this panoramic, deeply psychological view of how power manifests, rooted in fundamental drives repeating across history. It's a lot.
It is. And having journeyed through his ideas on crowds, packs, survival, power, transformation, command, based on these excerpts, it really makes you stop and think how relevant and maybe uncomfortable these ideas are today.
Canetti, near the end of the source material, offers a specific observation about our time. He suggests the increased pack dynamic dominates the modern world.
Arguing that modern industrial production, our relentless drive to create more, is a colossal, unchecked expansion of this ancient urge for multiplication and abundance.
Production, he says, is rampant, proliferating ever faster, leaving no moment for reflection. He sees it as the modern frenzy of increase, the closest thing we have to a universal faith. Even terrible wars haven't stopped it. It's everywhere.
And when you start thinking about that, you can see echoes everywhere, can't you? Online crowds forming instantly, absorbing everyone, temporary equalities, needing shared direction, trends, outrage, feeling that density or energy.
How do the urges to grow follower counts, likes, virality play out online as a manifestation of that increased drive?
Or political rallies, protests, online movements? Do you see elements of the baiting crowd targeting an enemy, prohibition crowds united by refusal, reversal crowds discharging frustrations?
What about consumer culture? Fueled by advertising new products constantly. Is this, at its heart, the increased pack manifesting as a relentless drive for more production, consumption, more things, embodying that ancient desire to be more by having more?
And the sheer volume of information, stimulation, demands. Does it sometimes feel like that manic or paranoid state Canetti describes? A flood of tiny inputs, a mania for finding connections, unmasking deceptions? Are we exhibiting societal symptoms of information-induced paranoia?
And finally, how do those dynamics of command and obedience, the stings, play out in modern institutions, corporations, bureaucracies, or even the algorithmic commands of online platforms nudging our behavior? Does the sting offer a way to think about responsibility?
Canetti isn't offering easy answers. He's providing a powerful, sometimes dark, but incredibly insightful framework for understanding these fundamental human drives hidden beneath modern life, highlighting these deep patterns.
And as the source material mentions, Canetti saw his work as ongoing, hoping to supply omissions later. This deep dive, guided by your sources, is really just a starting point for your own exploration.
It certainly leaves you with a lot to chew on. So we've taken a significant deep dive into Elias Canetti's Crowds and Power, guided by the sources you provided. We've explored the core attributes of crowds, volatile birth, fear of disintegration, growth, equality, direction.
We've looked at packs, hunting, war, increase, lamenting, grappled with survival as the source of power, built on death, related to rulers.
Touched on transformation masks, mental illness, paranoia's unmasking, and traced the primal roots of command and its modern forms. It's challenging, unsettling, but undeniably insightful.
We truly encourage you now to observe the world around you through Canetti's lens. Do you start seeing these dynamics, crowds forming, packs coalescing, subtle power expressions, transformation, or resistance to it?
What stands out to you from this deep dive? Canetti offers a powerful, sometimes bleak perspective. It makes you wonder.
If the modern world is, as Canetti suggests, increasingly dominated by the relentless frenzy of the increased pack, driven by production and endless growth, what forms of the lament, that fundamental ritual for processing loss and communal identity or other essential human needs, are being suppressed or lost? And what happens, what forms might they take when those fundamental needs inevitably reassert themselves in a world obsessed only with endless increase?
A fascinating, perhaps unsettling thought to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Elias Canetti's Crowds and Power.
Keep exploring these ideas.